Hello, my name is Donald Peck. I'm a pastor at the United Methodist Church in Loami, Illinois. I make videos like this on a weekly basis sometimes. For those of you who wish a lesson for your in-home worship or your in-home Bible studies. Today's lesson is from Isaiah and Luke, Isaiah chapter 6, beginning with verse 1, and it reads like this. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated upon a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each of them with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 wings they covered their feet, and with 2 wings they were flying. And they were calling to one another these words, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. And at the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the threshold shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. And I cried, Woe to me! I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. And then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched it to my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned. And then I heard the voice of the Lord. Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. And then in Luke chapter 5, beginning with verse 5, one day Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, which is another way to say the lake of Galilee. The people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. And he saw at the water's edge 2 boats that had been left there by fishermen. They were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to push away from the shore. And then he sat down and he taught the people from the boat. When he finished speaking, he said to Simon, Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Well, Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught a thing. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. And they did. And they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came, and they filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. And then Jesus said to Simon, Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on the shore and left everything and followed him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, the connecting event for these 2 lessons is the call. Isaiah is called to be a prophet, and Peter is called to be fishers of men. When I was a teenager, growing up in a little creek adjacent to the Mississippi River, they used to tell us that Jesus called the poor fishermen and gave them a life with purpose. And I wondered about that image, and I look back now at that statement, and I know what influenced them to say that. and the Mississippi River, all the men who fished commercially, they were always broke, they were smelly, and drank lots of beer. Well, not so for the industry on the Sea of Galilee. Fish was a major source of protein for the Galilean region. Peter had boats. He had the ability to process smoked fish and a distribution system. All he had to do was announce the availability, and people would come with their sacks and their baskets and buy fish from him. And more than likely, as a chief executive officer, he could delegate to the extent that his source of income was maintained while he was with Jesus. And then Isaiah. Isaiah was the only king that Isaiah knew was Uzziah. Uzziah was a good king for Judah, the lower half of what we know as the state of Israel. Uzziah reigned for 39 years, which is a long time in that period. And he was the only king known to Isaiah. He didn't know anyone else. And the reason this is important because it reveals a time of political stability for the southern half of Israel, Judah. And now King Uzziah is dead. So the politics, the economy, the defense, the government all face collapse. And people were grieving. Entrance stage right Isaiah and his call to bring the message of hope for the population. And the more exciting part of the call is the vision. Let me reread it. I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were the seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. They were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. Well, this must exist because it's a picture that God gave to Isaiah. And the seraphim, the whatever you call it, whether it's an animal or some sort of creature, I don't know. But the image, I know somebody who does graphic arts, and I wonder what he would do with this image. Oh, and I fail to get any interesting message from the seraphim, other than the fact this whole scene must have been a glimpse of worship in heaven. Well, from that, there's a couple of things. Number one, who is the object of worship? And number two, the fact that this is an encounter with God. One thing we forget on this earth when we worship and we go to church is that worship is for God and not humans. God here is the audience, and God needs to be the audience of our worship. The residents in this scene and in our existence are the worshipers. You and I, in our worship services, need to actively participate with the intent to glorify God. Do not go to any worship service expecting to receive. That is not the purpose of worship. The worship is to praise. To worship is to praise with gusto and enthusiasm. Aren't you excited about the chance to offer corporate praise to God? And the other thing, I used to tell people when I went fishing on Sunday, I worshiped in my boat. Well, he didn't either. That's not true. I may have said it, and people may have believed it, but that was not worship. All right, me fishing on my boat on Sunday morning. That's not worship. All right? Worship is a corporate activity where people are the worshipers and they do so with intent to glorify God. The only thing I glorified in that boat was me, because I was fulfilling my desire to do what I wanted. And when we go to worship to do that, all right, that's not worship. The other thing about worship is that when we go to worship, we need to expect an encounter. It may not happen, or it may not happen to much extent, but we need to expect it. One that shakes your soul, one that shakes your belief, and one that highlights your mission in life. What we need to expect, like Isaiah, is one that will give to us a life-changing event. This encounter that we experience in worship, we should expect that it would be a life-changing event, and one that challenges you to say to God, "Here am I, send me." Now that is worship. Now, to Jesus. Jesus tells Peter to fish on the other side of the boat, the deep side. I relate to that. Oftentimes I would take my sons to fish in our boat, and I would fish on one side of the boat and they would fish on the other. And sometimes we would be perched on a sandy bank in which there was a windward side and a leeward side. And I would have, there'd be one of us that wouldn't catch any fish and the other that would. All right, why is that? Well, the fish are going to congregate on the leeward side, the side on which is not being affected by the wind blowing across the waters. They just do that. Whether they're spawning or not, they do that. So, I've always noticed that when I was fishing, that you can get perched on a sandbar and be fishing, and there's only fish on one side of the boat. Never made sense to me. Now it does. And I like that image. I like that image. That we need to be on the right side of the boat when we live our life. Now the other thing is, I heard one preacher one time talking about this lesson, and he suggested that Jesus sent a telepathic message to all the fish of the sea to congregate at Peter's net. And I like that image. I like that image. It's the visual in my head kind of goes wild with the idea that Jesus telepathically calls like we would call our dog, on a hunt, and tell him that the hunt is over. Come home. We're going home. That's what the fish were doing. They were coming to their Creator, Jesus. All right. And the other thing, kind of a political thing for the time of Jesus, Jesus sent a message to everybody, especially Herod Antipas, who was the Roman ruler, that I rule all nation. I rule all nature. And Rome does not. Wow. Well, the other thing, the size of the catch. The size of the catch tells Simon and his companions that this event has been no accident. Excuse me. And the greatest moment in their fishing career causes them to stop and ponder just exactly who is this man in front of us. They recognize at that moment that this man, Jesus Christ, has power over all the fish of the sea. And Jesus, what he did was take Peter's humble faith and provided Peter with an encounter. Now, all of us live in uncertainty that often surrounds our faith, and we wonder just what's going on here in our life. And then we'll have an encounter. It may not be with God, it may be with some human, but it will be obvious that the impact of this encounter has come with a calm voice that says, don't be afraid. Jesus is in control. For you see, grace is active, it's not passive. Well, we often get discouraged, as the fishermen did when they end their trip without a catch. I've done that a lot of times. And I always told myself, you know what? It's just being out there. It's what we came to do. And if you catch fish, that's bonus. It doesn't always work that way. And I can understand how the fishermen would feel when they come in at the end of the day and there's no fish in their boat, especially when their livelihood depends on it. And they begin to have doubts about their skill and what they could do in life. Well, the next logical step in that thought process is to doubt your identity and just who you are. Isaiah felt the same way when he announced, I am a man of unclean lips, a sinner in the eyes of God. The Apostle Paul expressed the same thing when he said, I am the least of apostles, unfit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. And then came an encounter. For Isaiah, it was a live coal from the altar of God. For Peter, it was a pushy preacher who commandeered the fishing boat, and for Paul, the blinding light on the road to Damascus. This is what I believe. I believe that God will not let us become so despondent that we entertain the thought of quitting. Not only quitting what we do, but quitting in this life and just giving up. And at that point, I believe God will send an encounter to bring us back to what I call the highway of heaven. Well, one more thing. Part of answering or responding to these encounters is to abandon the old way. And I think it's a kind of a natural thing, because when you have an encounter of this nature, one that shakes your soul, one that challenges who you are or thought you knew who you are, well, that's part of it. One of the things I remember about fishing is that spawning fish will hover in the shallow, sandy parts of the lake. And fishermen, like myself, like to cast into those beds, and whatever it is, sometimes you wouldn't even have to put bait on your hook. The presence of a Aberdeen Gold number 6 or number 8 size hook will just frustrate them to no end, and they'll attack it. And you can catch fish without bait when it's in that condition. And that's what you live for, those moments when all you have to do is just cast your hook into the water and you catch fish. And this is the way Peter fished, I'm sure. Except in that lake, and what I know with the research I did, all the fish that were in that lake schooled. And so what Peter was hoping for was to catch a school of fish in relatively shallow water and throw their net upon the school and just fill their nets. with fish. So they probably didn't really try to cast into the deep. And when Jesus is with us, as we saw Jesus with Peter, in our minds, in our hearts, in our conversations, in our discernment, in our priorities, I tell you, something happens. And we are empowered to go into the deep water. Thoughts occur to us and opportunities occur to us that have never done so in our life. And we feel like we can take a risk and stretch ourselves towards something new. We can let down our nets in a place where we had never done so and actually find benefits of this life. Actually find fish. What was once the site of futility for Peter and his fishermen became the site of abundance, discovery, and sustenance. And the difference was they were following what Jesus was telling them. They were doing the bidding of Jesus Christ. And their life became more fulfilling. I think this is a lesson for us, that when we follow the commands and laws, and when we live as Jesus would have us to live, we will find a life of abundance, a life of discovery, and a life of moral sustenance. Invite God into your life. Every day when you wake up in the morning, say hello to your partner, pray a prayer, and begin your day with Jesus Christ, your partner in life. God bless you. I hope this helps.